Soundscape and Health. First we will hear, see, and listen to Jörg Preisler and Goran Lazarevic. They are presenting a paper which is called Developing the Soundscape for Hospital Waiting Areas. And yeah, stage is yours.
Yes, hello, thanks for coming. We are happy to present an investigation of the process of developing a soundscape for hospital waiting rooms. And this is a part of an ongoing project which is called Healing Soundscape. And in this project we address the question how interventions like sound installations may contribute to the improvement of the atmosphere and thus to the well-being of the patients and the visitors and staff in hospital waiting rooms. And this is realized within an interdisciplinary cooperation between the music therapy and the music multimedia composition departments of our University of Music and Theatre Hamburg, the musicology department of the Hamburg University, and we have cooperation with the Medical School Hamburg and the University Medical Center Hamburg, where the rooms are located. And the basis of our work is the concept that hospital environments may unfold healing and qualities and improve patients' care under the conditions that they are not only functionally designed and if aesthetics are valued. And we all know that the auditive influences and especially noise are relevant factors. And if we focus waiting situations, we see the disturbance through noise even more because those patients are under high levels of psychosocial distress, anxiety, and discomfort. In considering the soundscapes, we bear reference to the concept of atmosphere. So atmosphere can be understood as an in-between phenomenon relating the physical, acoustical, and social environment to our subjective internal experience. So there's a deep connection between the room and the people in it through the atmosphere.
So we tried to create a soundscape that would support the patients and the staff, and that will also be draw very little attention to itself, and that it would have low performativity. So we came to a concept of neutral music. A lot of our inspiration came from the works of Brian Eno and especially Satie and his furniture music. And so as Eno said, for his compositions, that the music must be as ignorable as it is interesting. And when listening to these pieces, some are more in this direction, some a little bit less. So our neutral music needs to satisfy these criteria, so it should be aperiodic, so without any noticeable repetitions. It should be disjunct, so that you're not really able to recognize melodical movements or sing the melodies that you heard before. Each individual sound should be rich in itself and be interesting when it occurs for itself. Tempo should be slow to medium, and dynamics should be also slow to medium. We used, at the moment we are testing two hardware systems. One is a Mac-based with a USB connection to the control iPad, and the other is a PC-based with a wireless connection to iPad. Both have a 4-channel speaker setup. And the core of the system, so everything is programmed in Macs. The core of the system is a digester. This is the abstraction that Georg Haidu wrote after the algorithms of Clarence Barlow, which were developed in the 70s. Digester has many different parameters, which I will explain a little bit later. And these instances of digester, they control a sampler, which is a multi-channel, multi-timbral sampler. So we are using 4 channels as an output to allow.
Already running? Sorry, is it already running, or is it somebody?
No. So this is a recording of the pieces that I recorded, and I had to then make it a stereo version. We have also a website where you can listen to many more of the pieces and download the stuff and read more information about it. But what we are now listening is not generated in real time. What is happening in the hospital is generated in real time. To allow control for the patients, we have an iPad interface that is located just next to the entrance, and there the patients can choose the pieces. So each name of the pieces actually represent a single composer who composed for the project, and then each mood represents different preset, so different configuration. Can you go back, please? Different configuration of these parameters, which actually create a piece. Of course, volume control, it's bilingual, and we are really hoping that we get feedback from the patients so that we can then analyze if what we did actually made any sense and any improvements. It's a five-point scale. We opted for emoticons because it's language independent. And here we would prefer if we got also some demographic info, but it's not necessary. So the system will save the feedback as long as one on the scale is given. Yes?
Yes. So the compositions for our soundscape were developed in an interdisciplinary context of our project. And our interest was to investigate the composer's work. So we have 7 sets of compositions made for a small private waiting room, you see here, in the heart center of the Medical Center Hamburg. So this room is dedicated to a small amount of patients and mostly suffering from vascular conditions. And it is acoustically dry, and even the slighted sounds are perceived clearly. So the general feel is that of a small place. And the composer's work was embedded into several communication processes. So there were smaller groups, discussions between composers themselves. They were mostly focused on the choice and the quality of the sound materials and the technical aspects. And we had full group discussions between all the disciplines in our regular seminars, between composers, music therapists, and musicologists. And they were mostly dealing with the effect the resulting music would have on patients, including, of course, ethical aspects. It's an important issue in this project. And in those seminars, we also listened to and discussed some of the developing pieces, and later on, we sat together in this private waiting room you saw before, and we listened to the nearly finished pieces in the room and gave feedback there. And those feedback processes we consider as very important to reach intersubjectivity in the experience of the soundscape and to include different perspectives, because the patients who will be exposed to the soundscape might be quite heterogenic. So one thing was to give the feedback as kind of a very free and spontaneous emotional reaction to the sounds, and another thing was to prepare it carefully through an intersubjectively developed atmospherical and acoustical knowledge collected in previous analysis of the room, which later on there will be a slide about this atmospherical description, how we investigated this. Yes, and to investigate the composition process, we conducted and qualitatively analyzed interviews with each of the 7 composers. So they told us about their composition process. And the composers were students and alumni of the Department of Multimedia. And there were 3 female and 4 male composers aged between 24 and 35 with different cultural backgrounds, most of them from the region of Asia. So all of the composers had experience with electronic music before, and over half of them already finished some levels of professional studies in that direction. Nearly all of them were familiar with experimental music, but for most of them it was the first time to work with algorithmic composition. And only 2 of them had prior experiences in sound installation or site-specific sounds.
So what we realized during the interviews, but also because I was involved in the process of composition quite a lot also, is that all composers followed in general these 4 steps with some going back to some steps and then forward, but in general this was like a chronological way. So having some initial impulse, some initial ideas, then choosing the sound material, which for the composers took the most time and was the main focus in a way. Then it was organizing this material, so composing, and at the end came evaluation. To collect this room experience, we had several ways of doing it, and here you can see the most often used and the most important is just composers spending time in this room in silence and thinking about what would be beneficial for the patients, how would the patients feel in this waiting situation, and how they can then sonically help with that. The composers relied a lot on their ideas and on what they personally would also like to hear and bring there. As Pia mentioned, we did this atmospherical description where we analyzed the room and then gathered all the data, but it happens to be that the composers actually largely ignored this and focused mostly on their personal experience of the room. The inspiration that composers got, as mentioned, it was this personal experience, the needs of the patients as the composers perceived them. They tried to think of the ways how to relax and calm the patients. And here we see a quote from one of the interviews that says, "It brings your spirit out to an imaginary nature scene, to a place which is not the hospital. It was challenging because in this case I'm not composing a piece to fit into the room, but to take you out of the room." During the entire process, it was evident that the composers thought about space a lot, and this is something we will touch towards the end. So although we have a 4-channel system, we don't actually have spatialization module that would allow us to move the sounds through space. So we can only, what's the word? Get one sound source to play from one loudspeaker and be static there. Choosing the sound material was a very important step, and this was something that we discussed a lot in our composition classes. Based on these ideas of neutral music and the feedback that we got within our small group, we went for the sounds that had low iconicity. So this would be the sounds that are not too complicated in time domain. So we noticed that if you had a sample that consisted of 2 tones, tam-tam or whatever, then when using it with the system and the sampler, then it would become very annoying hearing always these 2 tones sitting next to each other. The similar thing was for sounds that have sometimes expressive crescendo, decrescendo, then again crescendo. So anything that could really identify sound as repeating itself was annoying after a few repetitions. We wanted to have sonically rich sounds, so that then naturally led to many people using bell sounds and drones. From the music therapy group, we got the feedback that nature sounds would be very beneficial, so we tried to incorporate those as well. And the composers were searching for something they called relaxing sounds, which was very individual. So for each composer, relaxing had some a different meaning. 5 of 7 composers used as part of their materials the sound that they themselves designed, and only 1 worked exclusively with electronically generated material. 3 used their own field recordings of various instruments or nature sounds, and the rest used samples found in commercial products. Organizing the system for working with digester. So that was a challenge for most of the people there. For some in greater or lesser extent. For people who already had a lot of experience in working with different samplers and software instruments, it was not so difficult because the basic principle is the same. So choosing the sample and then mapping it somehow and using it. But for others, they really had to start from scratch. As you can see here, digester has many parameters. It's a 17 parameter space where we can choose different scales, different meters, and a bunch of these other parameters which all affect the outcome to a greater extent. So for some it used to be quite frustrating at the beginning until they get a hang of it and learned the system simply and learned how to cope with it. Unlike what the people would normally assume is composition, like a composer sitting and writing notes, this was a lot of work with computer. We also programmed parts of the system, and there was really a lot of experimenting and just trying out and testing out the things. What we noticed is that even after composers thought, okay, this is everything finished, once we installed the system in the room where it was to be played and listened to it there, they figured out, okay, this still doesn't fit, and there were always some tweaking necessary once the system was in the original room. As you saw, the pieces are defined through a number of different parameters, and these parameters are saved in a max pattern system. So we were curious to see how the composers view these presets, and we learned that for most of them the presets combined to create a single bigger piece. So most of them thought in this larger scale way. One of the composers stated that for him it was not a piece at all, but just something to enhance the environment. Almost all of them were guided by the lines of pure imagination, and most of them saw their pieces as some sort of a journey.
Me? Yep. So for the feedback again, we reflected a lot about those feedback processes, and so the composer in the interviews, they stated that they used our feedback and found it helpful, but the amount of changes caused by the feedback varied because of some of the composers, they didn't make significant changes on their sound material because they had a very clear idea about their pieces. So sometimes it was a real challenge to compromise. But overall there was a growing awareness that personal musical and sonic preference had to be checked if they would be uncomfortable for the patients. So it's kind of that the composers had to find the balance between their personal ideas and styles, the artistic freedom, and the conceptual ideas of the other project members and the patients. Okay. Yes, this we had this before, but now the composers judged the interdisciplinary processes, and they said it was collaborative and interesting. It was sometimes a challenge to apply the expert knowledge from each discipline to the other groups, finding a common language. But yes, most of the composers said that they got inspired by the comments of the other disciplines. And they said that music therapists and musicologists, they didn't have such a specialized view as the composers. They responded in a more emotional way. So they formed varied imagery and associations, and they would focus more on the patient perspective. And bringing all these different viewpoints together was challenging and sometimes confusing, but universally considered helpful and necessary. So in the best case, you see constraints turned out into creativity. And due to the constant requirement to reflect the work, an in-depth work was achieved. So this might be our conclusion, and we really want to thank our, did I forget it? No, we can.
Future thoughts, but it's okay, we can discuss this.
Yeah, yes.
You have to go back to the other picture, please.
Yes, okay.
Now everybody's happy.
Yes,
Yes.
very easy. we still unter den Effekt untersuchen, die
We are still
investigate the
searching,
effect, so this is an ongoing project. We will see if people are happy with our soundscapes. Yes, thank to the people of our colleagues of the Klausen-Simon-Stiftung, the Hamburg Open Online University, for you, of course, listening, and now we can discuss a little.
Yeah. So we open this for questions.
I think probably one, I love it very much, your approach, I have to say, it's really great. We need much more of this in our society. But I think there is one not really, probably not so clever to choose composers, to work with composers. While you do this, you should work with sound artists and people which are much more open, because what is a composer? A composer, because I'm a composer too, usually has to argue and reasoning his music with musical internal factors. So, and this is, of course, that won't change if you say, oh, it's too agitated or so, but because they have an aesthetic concept and they don't used to compose for something. They compose for their own aesthetic approach.
Yes and no. Because this is something we asked them in the interview, and the answers that came from several of the people was, no, it was not, because I asked, guys, how do you feel when you are actually working, it's an applied composition for a very specific purpose that has very specific limitations. They said, first, limitations always exist. No matter your commission, you're always limited by some aspects. And the second, a lot of them had a background in working with film or other installations. And then they said, yeah, it's not so much different, because when I'm composing for a commercial or for a movie, also there is a director who tells me things, and then I just have to change them. So I was also surprised by that. But, yeah.
I'm not so convinced, but happily
So
fine.
this was the question I asked and the answer that I was given.
Sorry, I know your background, but I don't know your background. You are,
Multimedia composer.
you are a composer. Okay.
Yes. We'll see what the patients have to say about it.
And I mean, it's a core thing to reflect or to build up intersubjectivity in this very sensitive area with all those patients with their different needs. Yeah, but I don't want to talk too much.
So the musicologists involved, who were they, and what could you elaborate on their role more?
Yeah, they also were involved in our communication processes. So also in giving feedback.
In what sense, or what? Why did you choose musicologists to be on board, and how many did you choose, or how? What was there? Because I'm a musicologist, so I'm curious.
Yeah.
Shall I?
If you have to, I would say, yeah. If you have a good answer, please.
I'm always find a good answer.
Sure.
So we had the musicology group actually joined a little bit later. The project started, it was initiated from the UKE, so from the clinic, and then the music therapy and multimedia composition started. But then we realized we really want to evaluate what we are doing, and we want to get some scientific measurements and something that we can really hold on to. So to have some concrete data. So then we enlisted the help also of the musicology department. And as it is now, Professor Clemens Wöllner and his students, they participated in these discussions. They brought their own input. There was a one semester lecture at the musicology department that dealt with the topic of soundscapes and of the effect of music on the body. And right now there are, I think, 3 experiments that are currently running that deal with certain aspects of our work. So we hope to get some some ideas about the effectiveness. The experiments are, some were run in a laboratory situation, and they were also planning to then do the experiments with patients. So one experiment was the perception of time. Preliminary results concur with the information that we already had, that when you have a music in a room, you perceive time as going quicker, so that's already good for a waiting situation. Curiously enough, also when they don't find the music nice, they feel the time going quicker. One experiment will deal with the stress levels of the patients, and they want to measure the CO2 intake and perspiration, skin conductivity, and I think pulse rates. And one experiment wanted to deal with the emotional state of the staff, but due to some other difficulties with the staff that had to be scraped, and they are now looking for some other approaches. So that was what musicologists contributed.
Thank you.
Are there also plans for integrating, so maybe creating a more an ambience like? So for example the music to the body and all the other experiments that are coming out, because now you're working with I guess a mono soundscape coming out of 4 speakers. Or
What do you mean mono soundscape?
Yeah, because you have the soundscape is coming out 4 speakers, and it's only mono channel. So the same, or is it? I thought you were saying that. So maybe I misunderstand.
So at the moment,
yeah,
we have the sampler. And we have 4 channel outputs.
Okay.
So each of the generative processes sends the MIDI data to a certain instrument, which we at the moment can map to 1 or 2 channels.
Yeah.
So we can say, okay, for this preset, your instrument, this one will play on channels 1 and 2.
Okay.
So this is the current situation, and we realize we really need a spatialization model that will allow us to move the sounds in space. I don't know if this answers the question or not.
Yeah, that was more the matter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we go over.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we now come to presentation of the paper, which is called Environmental Sound and Virtual Reality for Clinical and Well-Being Purposes, presented by Cornelius Pöbel, but written by Andreas Uhl and Robert Kremer as well. He's the guy who presents us.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the team selecting our paper to be presented. It's the first time that I'm on the Global Composition Conference, also the first time that I'm in the, so to say, world of the acoustic ecology people. I'm very happy that I am here together with people who focus the aspect of listening so much. This is the roadmap, what I will be talking about in the next 20 minutes. Our project has a similar idea, and that we help for health for people, but we do not compose ourselves, but we want to use the soundscape of the nature. The project very much draws on the collaborative work together with the Listen project people, especially Garth Payne, who is here, and Sabine Feist. And in the Ansbach team, we do 3D audio recordings on selected spots in nature, and we use also a still image for the reproduction. And now the main objective of this research is how can soundscapes of nature played back in VR settings serve clinical and well-being goals. So this is the main objective. it's also a longer term project, and we are at the beginning right now. So I will present you the present state of the project. And the sub-questions for now are, what are the different effects when different VR reproduction systems are used? For example, with the glasses or with other representation systems. And for this research I'm talking about today, the question of the grade of the perceived immersion is also an important objective. Let me give you a short view to the background of VR-based research for clinical purposes. This research is more than 20 years old. We already have since the mid of the 90s healthcare applications in VR, and the main fields are pain management, I will give 2 examples later, anxiety disorders, movement disorders, and eating disorders, where you find VR application. For elderly people, I found several applications also invented right now, especially in the field of wellness and somehow being integrated into life, activate people. And also a big field is the medical educational training. So I'm a sound person, and of course the question is for me, what role can sound play? I know that from the movies, also often asking what role can sound play in a movie. And I saw here as well that the papers and the things that are regarded are also often the visuals. Sometimes sound is mentioned as a further, often then said, important subject, but only a very little number of studies focus the role of sound directly. I have here one example. This is a study on the field of pain management, and there is the question whether sound can enhance the analgesic effect of virtual reality. So they did with their proband's study where they hold the hand into 1 degree cold water, 1 degree Celsius cold water, and they measured how many seconds it took until the participants took the hand back because they had too much pain. And for example, when they did without any VR intervention, the people could put their hand in the water for 30 seconds, and if they gave them a VR game and only played the sound of the VR game, then it was 40 seconds. If they played only the visuals, then it was 55 seconds, and if it was the visuals and the sound, then it was 79 seconds. So the result is there is an addition of sound increased time. With the addition of sound, the time increases of an average of 35%. Another study I found also addressed the role of sound, but not that much explicitly. Was also in pain management. It was in the field of burn care. So when you have to change the dressing, this is all creates a lot of pain. And in this study, people were given 8 VR movies where they could select it, and also they were in qualitative questions asked whether they thought the sound played a bigger role, and 3 of the people said yes, they think that the VR experience without sound would be less intensive, and but there also were other people who said very pragmatically, yeah, but if I have the headphones on my ears, I cannot really hear what the doctor says, what I should do when I do the dress change. So they say they conclude it's necessary in the future to determine the provider acceptability of the use of sound as a component of VR technologies for distraction during burn care. I did not find a study that was explicitly addressing the question if the immersive sound really plays a big role. These games only were with movies were only stereo sound. And but I found several papers, as I mentioned earlier, that said that sound should be more investigated in the field of VR for clinical purposes. So besides our personal motivation to go into that field, there is also a need to investigate the possibilities of sound in VR for clinical purposes. And now the topic where we are working in the Listen project. Of course, first you need to record something. Here is quickly the technology which we use. I tried simply to be as compatible as possible together with the colleagues in Arizona, because we also want to add our recordings to the Listen database, and then it's of course good if you have the same recording equipment. And for our reproduction we have two systems. One is a head-mount display with headphones. Garth Payne will talk tomorrow a little bit about that. The name is Eco Rift. And then we have developed a 3D speaker system and visual representation in a room. And one of the requirements was that we are able to put that into a hospital or elderly people's home. So here are quickly some summation of the requirements we had. The most important thing was that we are really able to put it during the experimental phase in a hospital or elderly people home, that we are below a specific amount of money, that we also can adapt this system for other projects at the university. And the system was built with the focus on the sound, not with the focus on the perfect visual representation, but as much as possible for us for the sound. So here you see an image of the plan, how we planned to build this thing. In order to get in there, you take this screen like a doorway, then you simply go in. And if you only look at the speaker system, we have 3 layers of speakers with four speakers each layer, and the sweet spot is at a height of 1.6 meters. That's the average human ear's height. All these things I will skip now due to timing reasons, but you can read that in the paper. Here is an image of the room when it was in its first state finished, and we tested it to put it to another location. We have put it in the foyer of the university, and here is an image of that, and you can see here that several people can be in that room. This is a group of the academic Chinese, not quite, academic partners who came to visit our university from China, Tongji University. We also invited many people from the university to go into the room because we want to show, of course, what we are doing. And interestingly, some people, especially from the Verwaltung, from the administration, they mentioned that they would like to have such a room for a longer time, because they realized when they were in there for 5 or 10 minutes, it had a refreshing effect on them. Okay, now one question also coming along with the topics of the conference is how can this be integrated in the context of learning and research for students. I'm in the multimedia course, and many students who like to specialize in audio would like to produce their rock bands and want me to teach them mixing and mastering, things like that. So that's not the main focus they have. But of course we have a big advantage that we have partners. And this is, for example, what Garth did, do a listen workshop. This is of course giving always impulses into the student groups. And I have a class in perception, and I do there an introduction to the Listen project, and then the students can choose among different assignments the analysis of existing recording and creating an artwork using recorded material. Of course, they can do their bachelor thesis in this field. Then we have also a master class, a master study course. There we have a module with 15 credit points, very huge model, and there we did a lot of work for this project. For example, doing ongoing recordings at a selected spot in nature each month, analyze those, use the recording for further work. It's also possible to use it, for example, to create a soundtrack for the campus radio. Then there is the opportunity to work in the team of the development of the ILERO and work in this research. Also, we have a partner for a nature education station close by in the nature reserve, and there the idea is to create VR-based learning or serious gaming scenarios with our recordings.
What is ILERO?
Ilero is this room,
Ah, so.
immersive listening
Got it.
experience room. Okay, one of the main experiences, besides the usually hands-on learning by doing recordings and so on, is that several students mentioned a differentiated auditory perception is established when they start to analyze and really focus on this sound world. Also, I saw that some students developed new ways of artistical practices. We had 1 month ago a very nice installation in a Ansbach art night represented in the Ansbach Art House. And also I saw that the intercultural competences improved because, of course, this is an international project and the students are in that. Some aspects of collaboration. There is often the question, how can you do that? The main link, the physical link, is the Ansbach International Summer School. Sabine Feist yesterday did a talk where she told about the class they are doing there. And the class is Media Art and the Environment, focusing acoustic ecology through the lens, so to say, through the 49 Waltzes of John Cage. And around this class, we then do additional meetings, workshops, and so on. And this, besides the class, also gives the opportunity that students from the partner university in this collaboration come to Ansbach from USA and from Chile. Also, I gave a talk and a listen workshop at University of Universidad de Chile. And here are some images. So you see here guys from our partner universities, international students during the summer school in the Ilero. Here we did recordings in the And of Chile. There was where I did do this talk. A thing which I just mentioned, which was interesting for me, was that I saw that the students in Chile, the sound engineering students, had a different way, so to say, how to listen and how to reflect on what they hear. Well, the same recordings I use in my classes, but they were very much focused on the emotional states of the animals. So they were discussing very much in which emotional states the ducks you could hear were. Okay. So much to the collaboration. Yes, now a system evaluation. I have now something which is new, which is not in the paper yet, which I want to present. I already mentioned in the paper that we want to do this system evaluation. It's focusing the degree of perceived immersion of our systems. I mean, several people of you here know already that there is a knowledge that natural recordings help for health. But I met here new people and I saw new literature, I saw new projects that underline that more, but I'm still in search for studies that give a scientific grounded outcome on that, but I mean, I'm personally convinced that it really helps for health. There is, of course, the research showing that if you have a hospital room with a window looking into the nature like here, people in average are get more faster healthy. So the length of stay in the hospital is lower if you have a window looking into the nature. Also, there was a study with monitors with displays, and there were nature photographs and the displays, and there was the question if there is a huge display, will it have a better effect? And there was, for example, the outcome that for the restorative effect on heart rate, a larger screen had a bigger effect. So the question, of course, is if you have now a mono source or a stereo source, if you only have headphones, if you have something like a Munger speaker that spreads out the sound in the whole room, will this somehow influence the effect of the environmental recording for health? And therefore we first wanted to do a measurement in how far people perceived to be really immersed in sound or in the situation. And we took, in addition to our two systems, the glasses and the Ilero room, we took a simple 5.1 control room, which we have at the university. We had this, it was the second system. System B, System C. And we draw on earlier work which was focusing the question of being immersed in sound and the question of 3D audio quality. We took out from this research 4 parameters: engulfment, envelopment, auditory spaciousness, and timbre. And then we had a 5-point scale for these 4 parameters, and we also had these 3 questions here, which people openly could answer after they had gone through all 3 rooms. These other parameters were they marked on the 5-point scale after each session. And these are our preliminary results. So this is very, very new. Engulfment, so the sense of being covered by sound. You see here the system 5.1 system, the headphone system, and the Ilero room. These were these results. Interestingly, in the envelopment, the means were closer together. A different result is seen when you ask for the auditory spaciousness and for the timbre, as spelled as to be natural. There, the 5.1 system had a higher mean in comparison to the headphone. With respect to the open questions, we saw that almost half of the persons stated that they felt most strongly to be in the natural environment when using headphones with VR glasses, and what reason for. They mentioned, but this is their personal idea, okay, this is because of the visual component. That's what that was their idea. But the same number of persons stated that they felt better transferred to the natural side in the Ilero. And the reasons given there were the immersiveness of the sound, the grade of the immersion with closed eyes, and also because they had bad feelings when wearing the glasses. Okay, of course, naturally, the 5.1 room was not that much felt to be so immersive, but that was also our test if our method really works. Yes, what are we going to plan to do in the future? Similar as with your project, we want to measure if it really helps people when they are for a while in these scenarios. And the question is, which methods do you want to use? So I'm very interested also to hear about your methods more precisely. I'm currently drawing on a measurement which was done in a study about the effect of Mozart music to very ill people. So I plan to use the same methodology or take something out of this methodology. And as I earlier said, I'm in search for other methods. Also the question is environmental sound or other sounds. Yes, what is really most helpful. And also during the discussions I had with doctors and hospitals, there came the question, it might be worthwhile to think about having a recording of a place which is to the person who is in the virtual world known already. So for example, if you imagine that what doctors asked of, okay, I have to finish. If you imagine old people who feel bad in a hospital, they want to feel somehow good, and it could help them if they feel like at home. Okay, I have to stop at this point. Here are my acknowledgements, and now there is time for the question. Thank you very much for your attention.
I was curious. I came in the middle of your talk, so maybe this was explained. How do you distinguish the difference between engulfment and envelope?
Okay.
For envelopment?
Here is the definition we also gave to the participants.
Being covered by sound.
So engulfment, if you have a thunder, yeah, so you are covered by sound.
Yeah.
But if you are in a crowd of people, then you are more surrounded by sound.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the definition we took from Lynch and such stuff.
Okay. Yeah. There's a surrounding should be feeling covered too, so it's,
Yes.
yeah, there's a subtle
This was
difference.
also the problem in the study, but as we did not want to work from the total beginning, we used a research work that was already out. But there are earlier papers of Soundscape together with Garth Payne. Perhaps Garth, could you also say something to these two words, envelopment and engulfment?
Yes, so these terms came out of Robert's PhD, which he did in Sydney with me, in which we did like a lot of psychology experiments about the perception of 3D space in audio. And this was in order to develop a set of guidelines for composers working in 3D space. And we often talk about immersion. And immersion is a kind of dull term. It's what does underwater, what does that really mean? And it's not really defining anything about horizontal or vertical space. And so when you think about envelopment and engulfment, then you start to see some definition about the three dimensions.
I'm picturing it, two axes,
Right.
vertical, horizontal now.
Right,
And
as
that
you
makes
see,
a lot more sense.
engulfment is
Yeah.
kind of being covered over, so that
Yeah.
sense of the sound coming over you rather than being in
Yeah.
the middle of it.
Okay, now I get it, thank you.
Yeah, I personally experienced that approach as a very much artist-driven approach. And this guy, Andreas Silzle, he works at Fraunhofer in Erlangen, and they are working a lot of from the technical side. So he did his PhD with Jens Blauert, and I did a mixture of both in order to have somehow a middle way in this study. His paper is about the quality of 3D reproduction systems. Yes? Okay, sorry.
Thank you both for both presentations. I think you addressed very seriously the needs also of the patients, and they're both well designed, I think. One aspect that I would like to, if you could respond, is the freedom of the patient to how much control they have. Because sometimes if you are not feeling well, you just don't want to hear anything.
Yes.
So have you explored like possibilities of perhaps having two rooms and having the sounds in one of the two rooms, or other options that they will give some freedom?
Mm. Yeah, in my case, I'm not working for a waiting room, but the idea to put that in a hospital is to have one room in which the system is installed. So you also then should be able to go into this room and to have nothing. Yes, it's a very open question for me in how far this can really help. Perhaps it can help for specific illness, perhaps it can help for specific group of persons, perhaps it can not help, perhaps this is the open thing here. But I agree, of course, if the people don't want to have that, they should not at all. It's also, I imagine the situation that you have it as for elderly people at home, home for elderly people, that you have this room. Because I know elderly people home close by here, and they have a Klangkoffer, sound suitcase with many sounds in that, and the nurses bring the sounds to the old people and say, "Hello, Mr. Smith, I bring you today the birds of blah blah blah," and they are doing this since 2014. And so if they have a room, the experience could be stronger. But of course, if you don't want to have any sound, it should be possible. I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Cornelius, could I just add to that, that within the headset system that we built, there are about 30 scenes. So you can choose a range of different places to be, and it could be, that the patients can then move through them until they find one that they find pleasurable or not pleasurable.
So I also have this system, the headset with me. So if you would like to test out very silent scenarios, you could do that.
I can say something about this. We tried to, we spoke a lot about this method, and we implemented this interface, so this, where they can go and make the music silent or choose other pieces. But the point is, we face now, there's a certain social code in the waiting room, so of course, then we are wait, and maybe they're not proud enough to get up and go. They're exposed to every other patient looking, what are they doing now? So this is maybe one thing. And maybe they are not so used to be responsible or to grab responsibility. So this is another task now. We have the thing but we have to bring it to the people. Make it very easy to change it and to interact.
Yeah, I was thinking about your room and just idea to have it as a dome where you have projection then like 360 projection.
Yes.
That would probably make the experience much more immersive when you can also look up at the skies, etc., etc.
Yeah. When we did our system design, we also were looking at those. We simply did not take it because we did not have the budget.
But is it that more expensive? Because the construction should be the same. You can use also just 4 projectors that you then, they wouldn't be projecting from ground level, but on the stands from above, and the speakers remain.
If you have a hint where we really could get it within the amount of money we have had here, I would be very happy to get that information.
Don't really have a hint for where to buy it, but I know people who might have.
Yes, that's great. If you can give me later on, I'd be happy.
You can ask Splatzer.
Okay.
Because we are doing lots of full dome
Okay.
stuff here.
Good.
As you saw maybe on the street.
Not yet. I was in the workshop, but there was no image yet.
Yeah, there's no image in the street, but
Okay.
we also work with 3D, 360 degree projections in the dome.
Yes, would be perfect to get that information.
I was just wondering, because as we discussed a little bit, that listening is usually a social thing or social experience. The waiting room is clear. I mean, this is open. This is the room. And here I'm not clear. Is it you say one guy is going there, or one elderly is going there, or 2 or 3, or is it basically for one person?
It's not defined. It's not yet defined. We have done the study up till now only with one person inside for each of the systems. But the room is big enough, as you can see.
Yeah, but you said exactly 160 is a sweet spot and so on.
Yes.
So it's not so.
Yeah, you see here the people standing in the room, and this could be a scenario which you could have in an elderly people's home.
Yeah, probably they want to sit.
Yes, then they could sit. Yes, but all these questions, of course, appear. Then what are you going to do with the sweet spot then if they sit and so on? But these are all the questions for the future work. But it's not designed only for one person. And also, I think this is also a huge thing which is different between the VR glasses and the room, because with the VR glasses, as we have them now, perhaps they are different in 10 years, but as we have them now, there is not really a bigger communication with other people who are in the same physical space as you are. Yeah. Yes, definitely, it should be thought about. Yes?
Yeah, maybe one more question.
Okay, I think I was waiting. Thank you so much for the both presenters. Many interesting questions here, but one point is that I'm just wondering if you have, in both projects, if you have involved the personnel of any this kind of institutions in the planning process. Because I can just see in the worst, of course there are very nice scenarios, but I can see in the worst case scenario you could have this expensive thing in the hospital or elderly care home, and after 1 month couple of the loudspeakers stop functioning, a nurse gets annoyed and stops it working, they are very busy all the time.
Yes.
Do they really want something that would demand their attention? And if they are not committed to it, is there any studies of any, I mean, if this is new, obviously not about this, but any kind of these sound installations or in care environments,
Yes.
kind of long-term follow-up, what actually happens to that
Yes, there is.
installation?
Yeah, there is not, of course, with this project, but if you look at medical research on the internal design of hospitals, also, for example, on plants, on the question of windows, on the question of the color of the light, on the question of the color of the wall, and so on, there is always the question, how does the staff deal with that in a long-term view? So, for example, nurses' notes are taken and they are analyzed, and then you see it. I mean, if you do it only for 2 weeks, of course, you don't get the data you want to have. But if you put that in a hospital, you of course have to do a study design together with leading people of the staff, and it has to work with the daily procedures. So this is a very important point which you mentioned, but of course if the system is in the end disturbing, it's useless. It's useless.
This comes from a really daily or weekly experience when I visit my brother he's ill and he's in a care home, and there's a room, there's a television and a radio that we have brought because he wants to listen to music. Every time we tell them that he wants to listen to music, not the television. Every time I go there, the television is on, radio is not on. And it's because when they are doing the care, they want to watch the television. So, I don't know what to do.
Yes, also, I mean, from my experience with elderly people home, I also think that all this interaction design is a very huge, important factor, and there is many things you could do to improve the living situation there.
Yeah. We closed the session because I get the mood that some people need coffee. And we now have a break, and hopefully the coffee is refilled.
Massive coffee.
So, thank you very much.